I'm Emily Navarrete. I'm Director of Design at CCA, and I want to thank you all for coming out. The second in this week's series of Dutch design events. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I just wanted to take a moment to thank the Dutch Consulate for supporting this series at CCA. Dutch Design at CCA has been a fantastic partnership. It's brought us all kinds of inspiration, and it's a partnership we hope to continue. I also want to thank Pam Zahadani and Alex McManus for helping to organize tonight's event, and the Industrial Design Program for hosting it. And now for tonight's speaker. He generously told me to call him Michael because I can say that. So Michiel Schwarz is our speaker tonight. He's a design thinker and futurist who, with Joost Elffers, coined the term Sustainism to name a movement that integrates social design and sustainable innovation. He's the founding director of Sustainism Lab in Amsterdam and the author of several books, including Sustainism is the New Modernism with Joost Elffers, and most recently, the Sustainist Design Guide, how sharing, localism, connectedness, and proportionality are creating a new agenda for social design. And both of those titles, by the way, are going to be available for your perusal or for sale at the reception, which will follow Michael's lecture just outside immediately after the lecture. So please join me in welcoming Michiel Schwarz.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, CCA, for hosting me and inviting me. It's really great to be here. It's also great to be in the Bay Area. Most people probably don't know, not so long ago I spent more than 2 years not far from here on the other side of the bay in Berkeley, so it feels very much coming home. And although I realize this series is about Dutch design and Dutch designers, and yes, I can assure you I am Dutch, but there are a lot of references to here. And I think part of my story is that the old localism or regionalism, where there is a big distinction between things local and global, is shifting, and I think I'm part of a product of that as well. So, so although, you know, you can see the color is already, it's sort of orange, isn't it? It should be more orange. It looks more yellow now. I tried to make it orange, and of course it's a cultural shift, so maybe it's also a color shift. This is the color I meant, because anyway, we should have calibrated color, because that's the color on the cover of the manifesto I made 3 years ago with Joost Elffers. So I'm going to be about, so you know what's coming, I think 45 minutes. It's a very broad story. I'll give you the whole story, let's say, from the beginning, from the macro to not so much the micro, but I will zoom in to things that are related to design. So bear with me if you think after 10 minutes, oh, this is very interesting, but I thought we were going to hear about Sustainist design and what's the design element. I can assure you I'll get there, but I think it is the interesting thing, I think, of this story, and I think it's a very exciting story because it's about the time we're in and the time we're coming. I will make a really big circle. I'm encircling where we are, and I think what's important, I've done quite a number of things in the last 2 years in design schools and design institutes, that this is the time that the real creativity comes from designers, in a way, redesigning their own profession and position. So for me, it's really important to ask these questions first and have put up this mirror. It's not like a theory or philosophy I'm putting out, like this is how I think the world is. It's like putting up a mirror, and hopefully a mirror that, in that reflection, that debate about what design is and what the social agenda for design should be will come out. That also gives a little bit already this idea, the strange word Sustainism, Sustainist. I mean, sustainability is already a bit of a strange word, and we know about sustainable design. Why a new word? And the point is, and hopefully it will come clear in the next 3/4 of an hour, that although sustainability in the ecological sense and sort of eco-design is part of where we are and where we're going, I prefer to have a broader notion that includes and connects to social factors and social, cultural shifts as well, and not see it as an environmental, almost like physical, technical issue that we say, as long as we can reduce the carbon footprint, we're doing okay. I think it's much deeper than that. Anyway, I will start. So, and the other thing, I said, well, yeah, it's Dutch designers, and yes, I'm Dutch, and I grew up there, and I spent most of my life there, but not all of my life. I spent a long time in England, also in the US, as I said. The other thing, I'm not serious about Dutch designers. I'm not a designer. That will become clear, no doubt, when I talk. Then people say, what are you? And it's always difficult to find words for it, but for short, I'm probably more a design thinker in the way that people like Tim Brown talk about design thinking rather than designing. So I will start, however, with my hometown, which is Amsterdam, or now, as it says, New Amsterdam, which of course has a different ring to Americans because that's on the other side, now called New York, but there's a new Amsterdam that has come up. This is a very interesting map, I think it is, that was made last year at a cultural hub, cultural center in Amsterdam, somewhere. This is like the map of Amsterdam, somewhere here. If you don't know Amsterdam, it doesn't matter, but it's on there. To literally map 150 very recent grassroots, bottom-up, community-based developments in the city, whether it's urban farming, or the repair cafes, or it's community-based learning, or it's neighborhood initiatives, just as an indication how literally the whole ground is changing. That in Amsterdam, in Europe, it also has to do with lack of public funding, so people trying to find their own solutions where before there was public funds. But there's enormous revitalization in the city on all levels, where I would say citizens, communities, neighborhoods design and redesign their area, their lives. Very exciting what's happening. One of the things that connects to that, I don't know, probably not many people were here last night, where it was hosted by the architecture department, and they had Hans Vermeulen and Hedwig Heinsman from Dus Architects, who are developing the first ever 3D printed house, canal house. Here's a drawing of it, and they had a great lecture. I'll come back to that. What's really interesting about them, that they don't set the technology apart. They really see it as part of in a way, redesigning the city and different ways of giving individuals also tools to become designers of their own environment. And about 5 weeks ago, they opened on this is on the site where the canal house will be. They have their printer and people can visit it, and this is like, real pictures. I think they already had 3,000-4,000 visitors in the first weeks coming. There's a great interest of and it really, I don't think it's been ever in the history of city building in Amsterdam that there were so many people, when things are being built, made visits, were even willing to pay $3 to look inside, to see the sort of exhibit about that. But the key for those sort of developments, there's one level, and we're sort of used to it, where we say, okay, well, you always have innovation, you have changing designs in a time of change, and that is true. You get new designs, and what you're doing, of course, here is always, you'll come up with new things, and designs are always change. You wouldn't be a good designer if everything, and if you couldn't add something, and by this change is always there. But I think to say we're in a time of change is in a way missing the point. I think we all feel, probably the last 2 years or 5 years, some say 10 years or longer, that we're not just in a time of change. It would be probably more appropriate to say we are experiencing a changing times in a very fundamental way, that so many things are being reconnected or changed or shifting, or the context, or how we look at the future, or how we deal with the past. And part of that, and I've been the last few years working with designers in design schools, design workshop, more and more I see myself talking about design, in quotes, design. Because we all know the old categories of what design is and should be are shifting. We don't know where it's going, but we know that there are things shifting, which of course is a really great opportunity to do new things and opens up enormous vistas, and that's partly what I'm talking about. But that as a starting point, I want to sort of step back and have my macro lens and say, well, that design is shifting is only part of a much broader movement, which I feel is like a cultural undercurrent and culture in a sort of anthropological sense. So I started to think about that there is a cultural shift that we have to come to terms with. We have to sense it, probably name it. I say more about that, to have something to get on, to not, you can say things are changing, it doesn't get you very far. Oh, things are shifting, I don't know where it's going. Oh, that seems all very vague. But there are things that are sometimes so fundamental that you can see things really moving in a major way. And so much so that when I started to work on this idea of a new times, and I started to talk about a new era, of course, I started to think, well, maybe we should look back and say, have we seen this before? You know, we know about, of course, the industrial era starting, but there are other, you know, how can you recognize when an era has started? So I was thinking back, and maybe it's something like this. Maybe this is when an era starts, you know, like first man on the moon, great, you know, it's nearly, what is it now, 45 years ago? That's, you know, getting close to 45, July 69. I used to spend part of my time when I was in my early 20s as a space journalist, so I know my space dates. So believe me, it's 1969, July 21st. But then the more I thought about that, significant as this is, and they're beautiful images, the real beginning of the era is symbolized by a different image. It's not this. It's not this image, but it's actually this image, which is 6 months before, in December 1968, the very first time that human eyes, i.e. 3 astronauts, Apollo 8, encircle the moon, look back with human eyes and see the Earth, as it then became called, as the whole Earth, a whole Earth. And that really was a new perspective. When I say a new perspective, it's in every way a new perspective. What I find interesting about it, that it's truly a change in collective outlook. That is a deeply cultural thing, and I think we're at the beginning of something similar, not because we've gone to the moon, because people start looking at the world differently. And if you look back at this picture, what that triggered, I don't know how many people have ever heard of this or seen this. Does anybody know the Earth catalog? Okay. Of course, you know, we're in Northern California. I mean, that's great, you know. Sausalito, where it started, it's just not far from here, across the bridge. But it really, and this was, by the way, the very first time that the image was used in a publication, other than NASA's own publicity. And the catalog really was about a new way of dealing with our lives, lifestyles, how to build our community, how to repair our own stuff, how to get, it was a book of resources. I think many years later, Steve Jobs even said, this is sort of like the internet before the internet. You could find things there to get things going. And it really is a shift. That image, that one image, symbolizes a major shift. Of course, now we're more than 4 decades later. A lot of the environmentalism, we don't even call it environmentalism anymore, we call it sustainability, is still there. But a lot of other things happen as well. We know that this world is also a different kind, we relate to that in a different way. Globalization, and then a major thing is, of course, the networking, the social media. You know, well, I don't have my iPhone on me and I'll put it away, but like we are in contact 24/7 with any place in the world if we want to. That's a major shift. So I was thinking, you know, don't we have another symbol like this one that we can say where we are now? I couldn't find where. The best I could do was this one, saying maybe where we are now is like some combination between sustainability and the network world. And I think that's true. And you start to, and it breeds a different way of thinking about all kinds of common things that we're used to. We see it around, once we start looking in a certain direction, what has changed. It's quite a lot. And let me show you a very short clip from Holland, but it is in English, the voiceover. Hope the sound works. Well, I'll say later what it is. Have a look first.
We live in a wonderful time. That's something you don't often hear on the news or read in the paper. That's why I'm going to say it one more time. We live in a wonderful time. The freedom we enjoy, the knowledge we've gained, the things we can do, how we're all connected to each other. Every one of us can have our say and be heard. The world has grown smaller. Yet when it comes to the economy, we're waiting for something big. A decision from the top. Intervention. A green light. But it doesn't come. The power is no longer in the hands of the big. The strength is in the hands of the small. Although you may not realize it, what you do every day does make a difference. You decide what you do with your money, or what you don't. Every act, however small, sets something big in motion. Because small acts create big change. A change to a different economy. One that's fairer, more humane, greener, more innovative. Take a good look around you because it's already here. And here, and here. Now it's up to you. The power is in your hands. Because together we will make small the new big. Follow your heart. Use your head. Triodos Bank.
So that's an ad which was in cinemas and on TV of a bank. It's not a environmental non-profit organization or some green party. This is it's not the biggest, but it's a major Dutch bank sensing that things are really changing. This, when you hear it's about social media, it's about small, it's about organic food, it's about local produce, and that. So I think, well, if banks are beginning to sense this, there must be something, just as a feel, it's also some of the images. If you make a similar thing here, you get different images. So I'd like to show it as part of a new cultural movement in Holland, but I think it's worldwide. And I've done quite a lot of lectures in the last 2 years, different parts in the world, here in Europe. And it is really a worldwide movement that is this strange new combination between local and global. And I don't know, people know Paul Hawken, also local in a way here, very interesting. He started to make a database of non-profits, and he first was 1 million and probably closer to 2 million non-profits in the world that are already actively promoting, but I would say the people associated with living with a new mentality, more with better food and more local and more social justice and urban farming and all these kinds of phenomena. And if you all add it up, my estimate is that there's at least 200 million people who are already part of this movement, living this movement, and quite rightly, Paul Hawken says it's the largest movement the world has ever seen, but people don't notice it because it's so dispersed, because there's all these million things. And I think a lot of things that are happening at the moment, from local currency, the zip cars, urban gardening, open source. Of course, I had to put the bike in, being from a flat country full of bikes. It's like 700,000 people living in Amsterdam. I think there are more than 700,000 bikes. I don't know how it's possible, but there are. Airbnb, energy, neighborhood energy, Etsy, locavore, even the High Line, a sort of new mix of dealing with it. All those things for me are really part of a big cultural shift. And when I say culture, I mean the things we value and the lifestyles, but a bit more fundamentally, looking at anthropology, these two things, and now it becomes a little bit interesting, I hope, this design, how we look at the world and how we design our world. And I think those two things really often go together, and we had maybe 50 or 75 years of modernism where the modernist view was so established that the first point, how we look at the world, was sort of forgotten, because we all looked at the world a certain way, and then within that we would design our lives. Now, both these elements are changing, like a dialectic, so we have to be much more aware how we look at the world, how we want to look at the world, who's looking a certain way at the world, and how that changes how we then design our lives and everything in our lives. So this is my definition when I say it's a new cultural era, And that is, of course, interesting, I find, as a new context for designers, in brackets, well, actually for all of us. And it should be that way around. So maybe we should first ask what it means for us as human beings and then as designers, instead of the other way around. But that may be another discussion. The other thing where I got quite excited about working with this concept with Joost Elffers is this is from this manifesto. Joost Elffers turned 250 aphorisms about the new culture into a visual book, and most of the pages, like this one, they're like posters, and we made a whole sense of posters. This is one of the posts we made. To bring new culture into existence, we first have to rename the world, because when there are major shifts, when this sort of cultural eras go from one to the next, I mean, if you go further back, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like Leonardo da Vinci waking up one morning and say, hey, look, we're in a new time, the Enlightenment or whatever. You know, it's much longer period. You can look back, but you sense things are changing because the old ways don't work anymore. And we certainly in that time, we know a lot of old ways, whether it's business models or how we plan cities or even our design processes don't work anymore. And the second thing is, which was my point about looking, when people start to look at the world differently and their place in the world, that's another indicator that culture's changing. But the third factor, which is really important, that I think to make people aware and in a way empower them to debate where culture then should be changing, is to give it a name. And I tried to think of examples where things like that happened, and I was thinking of more than, let's say, a century ago when the first car came on the scene, the first car was on the road. Does anybody know what people called the very first car when they saw a car on the road? That's right. And of course, it was only until they really gave it a new name, the automobile, that was mobile by itself, of course not completely by itself. It needed gas and needed road and I needed a different kind of driver, but then they realized something fundamentally shifted. So this is how it came about that Joost Elffers and I said, after modernism, we can't live with postmodernism or post-postmodernism. We really need a new word for the culture, and we came up with this word Sustainism. And we thought sort of the culture of sustainability, it's obvious. People have used this, anthropologists have used this, strategists have used this, policymakers have used it. And I started to Google the word Sustainism, and nobody had used it. Nobody had used the word Sustainism. So great, even more fun, let's keep that one. So we had the word Sustainism. Joost Elffers made a symbol based on an old symbol, a new symbol symbolizing the more interdependent world we are in, and I started to write a lot of things I'd done as a sociologist of technology and looking at media and culture and design into manifesto, which is the Sustainism. So let's give it a good title. Here's the thesis. This is provocatively what we say: Sustainism is the new modernism, which is a new word and symbol, a new mindset, a new lifestyle, and this is where I slowly move closer to design, something that will give us new design criteria. But first, I mean, modernism, of course, very important if we reflect on the history of design and technology. And Joost Elffers and I continue to say that since the book came out about 3 years ago, that what modernism was in the last, Sustainism will be in the 21st century as a sort of basic set. We don't know exactly what it looks like. We can't sort of pin it down, but as a basic set of ideas, ways of looking that will mark and shape the 21st century. We start to also play with it in a different way. We say we go from the square to the circle and the triangle, and I don't know whether you can see it here. No, you can't. It's all blurred. The background, this is actually on square paper, and then that's on isometric paper. It's all made of squares, and all the symbols in the book are designed on that. And when the book came out in January 2011, the International Herald Tribune, I had never used the word Sustainism, a new ethos for design. I thought, well, they sort of got what, I never used the word ethos. Ethos is quite an interesting word. I thought that's sort of a set of principles that we can work with. And that was in a way the beginning for me to start to look more and more what it means for design. And this is again one of these posters in the book. that we sort of proclaimed. We try to provoke people to say, absolute nonsense, because, or they say, there may be something in there, that the future of our built environment will be shaped by the ideas of Sustainism. Some of them are ecological sustainability, like this, that we can say they're cyclical or recurrent, reusable, recyclable. We had symbols. This is our preferred cradle to cradle symbol, because we don't like the sort of silly that are just going around, but of course we like triangles. But more importantly probably is that the sustainability idea has to be much more stretched and go well beyond green if we really want to capture what is really going on in this cultural undercurrents and connect with it when we shape, design our cities, our lives, our products, our experiences, our environments, all the things that our communications that designers are concerned with. Now I'll show you 1 minute of a little clip of the two speakers who were in the series yesterday about their 3D print canal house, because it sort of gives you a flavor on how they see high tech relating to a number of other social developments.
So we're just architects, and we're currently 3D printing a canal house. The thing is, we were already printing with these smaller printers for a long time, but as architects we were thinking, what would this actually mean for architecture? What if you really could 3D print buildings? We can really recycle waste materials into printable materials, eliminate large transport costs, really make unique and personalized architecture. You can print buildings and then just shredder them and then print them anew. For the rooms we're currently designing, you can soon just download them online, assemble them digitally into your favorite house design, just attach materials to it, and then just press print. This makes architecture really personal again, and it really bridges the gap between designer, client and builder.
So for us the project is also really about how the internet and the social networks can actually be influential in city making.
Sure, that's a different word here, like architects talking about personalizing and social networks, and we know that's happening everywhere. They're not unique. I mean, the 3D printing may be unique, but it's a completely different way of also looking at the role of the architects. And at the very least, we can say we know, of course, cradle to cradle, but we have to add, like I put on that Apple sign, that we'll also have these networks, small scale, large scale, social media, globalization, all kinds of new opportunities open up, and this is really what I call the beginnings of the Sustainist culture, where open source becomes a key element, and the idea of sharing, Creative Commons. This is a clip of a very interesting group of architects and city builders, planners in London, 00 Architects. Have a look at this.
So we're now seeing the beginning of what's been called the third industrial revolution, driven by the web and also by ever and ever cheaper access to digital fabrication tools like 3D printers and CNC machines. So where our present industrial economy is that we design things in the West, send the blueprints halfway around the world to be manufactured in a sweatshop for cheap labour costs, and then ship them the products all the way back again. We're moving into a future where the factory is potentially everywhere, where if you want something, you no longer necessarily have to buy it, but you can actually download it, adapt it, and print it at home or in your community. As the economist John Maynard Keynes said, it's easier to ship recipes than cakes and biscuits. Suddenly your recipes, your intellectual property, become simultaneously the most valuable thing in the world, but also paradoxically they want to be free and open and shared. If the factory is everywhere, the design team is everyone. One size no longer fits all. It gives us the opportunity to do for design what Wikipedia does for knowledge, what Linux does for software, to open it up. And we were fascinated by what that might mean for architecture in cities.
So maybe designers should all become like these recipe makers, as maybe that's the core of the new design. I don't know, it's an open question. What is clear that this mentality of Creative Commons is part of a real style shift. I really like the word style because it can be a physical thing, a visual thing, a fashion thing, And style is also something you can talk about, sort of a cultural style where things are done in a very different mode. And in the book I'll talk about in a second that followed this manifesto, I started to list a number of very fundamental shifts going from modernist to sustainist style. I won't go through them, but if you just pick out 2 or 3, I'm sure there will be on everywhere. When you look through that you have examples yourself that you think, yeah, that is sort of what's happening around me, whatever example of design you take, or people's lives, or cities, or how technology develops. And we saw, you know, here's the bank, you know, saying do more with less, you know, and small is the future, small is the new big. So let's home in the next 15, 20 minutes a bit more on what are then these characteristics of the sustainist culture and style, and how does that relate to design. One of them is that connectivity becomes, and connectedness, one of the key elements on all levels that becomes at the center of design, I think, much more that you design things first, whether it's objects or other things, and then you connect them. That objects as well as places, experiences are devised, designed, conceptualized from the point of view of connectedness. The other part of the importance of connections is that we have to learn to come to terms with very different connections between the local and the global. We developed a nice symbol of local, because I think local and localism is going to be one of the great growth areas in sort of how people shape their culture and local relations. It's based on both something from nature, like the bee hive, and something from culture, if you think of the old citadel of cities. So that's the hexagon. But then we opened it up. It's not, you know, the citadel of city used to be a closed, completely walled city. And now we are sort of semi-open, and then the global becomes the connection between different locals, involving a lot more sharing, of course, and like the shift from what I call what you have to what you share, I think is one of the undercurrents that we can see more and more coming up. And this is, of course, a bit of a pun on the modernist credo of, you know, less is more, and do more with less. But to not so much focus on the ecological sustainability, but sort of the social factors of this new sustainist way of looking at the world, there's 4 elements that I started to home in on. That it's more and more about relationships. This is when I talked about connectedness. Sharing becomes more important. Local is a quality, so it's not something that's embedded in geography. It's the local relations that really I value, and you see it most in food. More and more people want to know who grows their food, or I go to the farmer's market, or here I used to go to the farmer's market in Berkeley and talk to Eduardo, my baker, because not only I like his bread, but I like to talk to the person who makes bread and tells me where the grain's from and so on. And the 4th one is proportionality rather than scale. And that became the lens for me to look at design through this sustainist lens, which is one way of saying we have to, that word sustainist, encapsulate the social and ecological together, and we have to learn to look at it together, because I think this is really where things are moving. And there's a different way of saying that. What is then Sustainist design? We had a working definition saying, well, it's sort of sustainable innovation, and what you may call social design, but it needs a different word because we crossed them. And that was the beginning of this booklet, which, as Emily said, is for sale at a special price. I must add to it. I brought some special copies. And we try to then open the debate to say, like, if these are the new qualities and values, we may have to think very deeply about how do we get those in our design briefs. We know that functional elements are important in design briefs, environmental factors, contextual factors, aesthetics may also be in the design brief, but some of the other qualities, like the connectedness, sharing, localism, proportionality, what might design look like if they become in our design brief right at the beginning of our design process? What does it mean to design for connectedness when everything is connected? And we try to raise this in the Sustainist Design Guide, just open the debate, 12 small cases and case studies we put in. This is one of them. This is a bridge in Rotterdam, so thank God, Dutch design. Yeah, it's Dutch Design Week. Between two buildings, a bridge, but it was a sort of bottom-up grassroots initiative triggered by some young architects, Zeus architects. It's entirely crowd-funded. It's the first public bridge that's crowdsourced, probably in the world. You could buy for 25 euros, 125 elements, and here your name would be on there. And so that when the first part was finished, like here, people really felt it was their bridge because they were part of it. Not only is their name on there, but it was then architectural activism becomes like a design strategy. Just as a little example, something is changing. Similarly, what might it mean to design for sharing? If we are what we share, if that's sort of like the credo of the next period, the next era, and we what would that mean? I mean, we do realize that, you know, we can share skills or stuff or space, time, and there's a whole big movement that's now called collaborative consumption. I don't know whether many of you know, it's a great book that sort of launched this whole idea, and there's a great site here from the Bay Area called shareable.net that tries to now pull together all the examples in the world of sharing. But it's also official bodies or corporations who really start to get onto that. I mean, this is an example. Since about a year, Seoul in Korea, they brand their city by saying we're a sharing city, and they have policies and legislation in their city policy to encourage sharing in all kinds of ways. And this was just a few weeks ago that Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, is trying to encourage cities to embrace these kind of policies and try, I think actually even financially, but trying to really run a campaign of sharing in the city. And of course this is this mentality that you saw already on the film, like Wikipedia, or that products could be made locally because, you know, you get the recipes from somewhere else and you bake your own biscuits. So localism also becomes something quite different. And this is, of course, exactly when I showed this map at the beginning, which is beginning to happen, but it's also in different ways. In the food movement, you can see it. So all these shift, and that's what I find interesting with this kind of paradigm shift. It's not just one element that shifts. It all shifts one after the other. They're all related, and when you add them all up, yeah, that is what I call as a cultural paradigm shift, and also this shift towards that small, maybe the next big thing, as someone said. And I call that the principle of proportionality, that we shift our focus from scale to proportionality. And what I mean by that also in design and architecture, there's this idea, if you have a good design, then your ultimate proof is that you can upscale it forever, more and more and more, and that's in that sense, bigger is better. That we have to learn to gauge, to assess what is the appropriate size or speed, and therefore proportionality. We know when things are too small, it has no effect. When they're too big, it begins to lose its essential qualities. I mean, we see it clearly when there are, I mean, I have always good examples, examples from food, because I like food a lot and I like cooking. But if there's a great restaurant that has great food, then they may open a second one and a third one, and they may retain their qualities. But when they become as big as Starbucks, I can tell you, and long before that, they will not give that quality anymore. And we have to, as designers, also gauge in our design, what is the proportionality, what's the appropriate scale for the core qualities that is in our design. And that is really a new question, and it's very much present in what's happening. I don't know how many of you know Etsy, or have you looked at Etsy site? Enormous movement, only started 8 years ago. 3 guys in Brooklyn thought of an idea. There's eBay, but why isn't there an eBay for small scale, handcraft, locally made, craft skilled production? And now I think that recently they went over the $1 billion sales mark. There's like 10 million buyers worldwide that buy on Etsy. Real big movement. And also, in another sense, Sustainist, it's not like a big capitalist thing that they want to make money. 3.5% of the sales price goes to Etsy to run their operations and their software and give the facilities like the the online shop window of their market, and 96.5% goes to the maker. Well, that's unique. If I sell this book, I'd be lucky if I get 3.5% of it. I'll probably get 1%. 99% goes to other people. Here are makers. This is power of the makers. This is fantastic. I mean, this is like, it's a different thing. Things are turned upside down. The same speed is an interesting thing. You know, we of course we can do things faster, but certain qualities we know, we need to build into that. Maybe sometimes selective slowness. Sometimes we lose some qualities. We know just from moving in a city that there's a different experience walking or cycling. And it's not that one's better than the other, but there are different qualities. And I think those are the sort of things. So ideas of local tempo, selective slowness, and the appropriateness, the proportionality may be also in proportion to values, ethical values. I don't know how many of you heard of the Fairphone, another Dutch design product. It launched only a few months ago, and it's the first time that, of course, it was the first attempt, but it's a real working phone, that they started to try and develop a phone which is not just minimal ecological impact, but also really fair in right from the mining of some of the metals to the whole process. And if you hear them talking about themselves, it's sort of a form of design activism, that the mobile phone becomes a change agent, not only to make aware that most phones are really bad for the ecology and bad in a social sense, that it's very, very unfair how the workers, and you go and look in Congo, some of the minerals and metals that I needed for that, it's unbelievable. But so design activism and this idea of fairness became a quality in the design process, and it's a very interesting shift, I think. So if you then take it all together, if this is like the four, and there are probably more, and maybe openness and repairability, or taking that idea of maybe democratizing design, but at least those four, connectedness, sharing, and localism and proportionality, are four new qualities that we have to build into the future of design, I think. And we have to, I don't know what it means. Say, well, what means all this stuff? I can't give you the answer. I can just, together we can, we put these different glasses on and say, look in that direction. What happens if you link social and ecological design? And just to trigger it, saying it's not just sustainable, it's not just in an ecological sense or social, let's call it something else. And we now have to, in a way, fill in all the things that it could mean. I've listed some of them, like what is then slow design? I mean, slow is also quite a nice one, because when we talk about slow food, we realize it's not eating slowly or slow cooking. No, slow is a quality that you relate to with certain values and experiencing food. In a similar way, you may talk about slow designs. We have to collectively discover what could slow design be, or proportional design, or collaborative design. And this is like the new sort of broad agenda that I put out, that I'm excited about, because I think it really links to what's happening. And in many ways, I've been trying the last 2 years to present it as a way of opening the debate. And I'll finish with this. This is a commission in the Hague Municipal Museum last year, 3 very big panels of 3 of the posters and symbols that Joost Elffers designed. It was an exhibition about art and nature and sustainability, to open the debate about the future in that way. It was great to be asked, and it created quite a lot of discussion. That's where I want to leave it. This is my full circle. Thank you very much.